A video went viral recently claiming that burnout is not real. Take a look.
You're not a candle. You can't burn out. A human being cannot burn out. I think that that's a misconception about hard work. I don't know successful people who are still in the game who are burnt out by a long day.
This is exactly why so many high achieving women are suffering silently in burnout. Because the people who are talking the loudest about burnout and who are influencing leaders and decision makers are the ones who know the least about it. I'm Dr. Qaali Hussein. I'm a full-time double board certified trauma surgeon, and I'm also a mom of 6. And let me be very clear. As someone who is still in the game, I have burned out not just once, but several times. And I remain in the game not because I just cope with burnout, but because I understood the science behind it and how to treat the root cause and not just the symptoms. And in this video, I'm going to show you the science behind burnout and how you can stop coping and start recovering for good. All right, let's get into it. So is burnout even real, and what does the science actually say about it? So first of all, who am I and why do I feel equipped to teach you about burnout and burnout recovery? Again, I'm Dr. Qaali Hussein. I'm a full-time double board certified trauma surgeon. I'm also a wife and a mom of 6, and I do keynote speaking and teaching burnout recovery and career strategy. And so yes, my plate is very, very full. And because of that, I have burned out several times. And it wasn't until my physical breakdown from chronic exhaustion that I was forced to slow down and learn the science of burnout and the root cause of it and fix it for myself so I can continue to stay in the game and do the things that I loved in a sustainable way. So what is the science about burnout? First question is burnout even recognized in the medical field? Absolutely. The World Health Organization, which is responsible for identifying and naming diseases under the International Classification of Diseases, has recognized burnout as an occupational phenomenon. Now, let me clarify something here. It is not classified as a medical condition. So what does that mean and what is the difference? So for something to be defined as a medical condition, we have to be able to diagnose it regardless of who the patient is, regardless of who the physician is, and regardless of where you are in the world. So for example, if you have diabetes, you will be diagnosed the same way, regardless of who you are, regardless of who you present to, and regardless of where you are in the world. We have the same criteria, the same diagnostic language, and the same markers, the same laboratories to help identify and diagnose diabetes. The same can be said for high blood pressure and a lot of other diseases. So we have defined one specific thing that we can look at to say this is diabetes. For burnout, that is not the case. Burnout is recognized as an occupational phenomenon, something that happens in the workplace that has been recognized since the 1970s and that we are still learning about every single day. So while you can have the signs and symptoms of burnout, you can't go to 10 different physicians and have the same diagnosis. We still don't have the same language to describe burnout, and we don't have the same diagnostic criteria. There's not one lab test or one study that we can order to help identify burnout consistently from physician to physician, person to person, and no matter where you are in the world, right? So yes, burnout is recognized under this classification of diseases, but it is not a medical condition that can be diagnosed in a clinical setting, okay? And I want to be clear in making this distinction because there are a lot of resources online that claim that burnout is now recognized as a medical condition and that you can go and get diagnosed with burnout. That is not the case as of yet. So how do we describe burnout? Based on the classification by the World Health Organization, there are 3 dimensions of burnout that we can measure, and those are exhaustion, cynicism or being negative towards your work, and having reduced professional effectiveness, which means you are not performing your job at your best. And according to Dr. Maslach, who's one of the premier researchers on burnout, there are 6 factors in the workplace that contribute to burnout. And those are your workload, your ability to have control, whether you have autonomy or you're being micromanaged, reward, are you rewarded adequately for the hard work that you do, or is your hard work ignored, right? Community, do you have community within the workplace that supports you? Fairness, are you experiencing bias or discrimination in the workplace? And values, are your values respected? Do your values align with your workplace, or are your values discriminated against or not even recognized? Another thing that needs to be clarified when we talk about burnout is the source of stress. Now, according to the World Health Organization's definition of burnout, it applies specifically to workplace stress and not stress in other areas of life. So why is it important for us to specify this and to question the definition of burnout? So if this definition of burnout holds true and the only source of stress is the workplace, how do we explain the difference in burnout experienced by men and women? Studies show that women experience more burnout than men. How do we explain that? And so in this study that was done in women physicians, when all other workplace factors are the same, women have been found to have more burnout because of the challenges in work-life balance or work-life integration, because women have disproportionate outside responsibilities. While they do the same work, they go home and have more responsibilities in childcare, caring for older parents, and even in the workplace, they may not have sufficient support related to pregnancy or maternity leave. And especially for women who have more responsibilities outside of the workforce, chronic stress leads to burnout. So regardless of the source of stress, whether it is just workplace stress or workplace stress plus home responsibilities, the underlying basic physiology of burnout, chronic stress that has not been managed successfully. So what is the impact of chronic stress that goes unmanaged? So let me explain this graph. It's very, very important. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain it. This is what happens to our levels of stress mediators, such as cortisol and adrenaline, over time. So when you have acute stress, which means you are acutely stressed, for example, you meet a bear in the woods, right? Your stress response is protective. This is a normal physiological response to stress. It's the fight or flight, right? Are you going to stand there and fight the bear, or are you going to run away, right? And so what happens is your body releases these hormones, the adrenaline and the cortisol and other factors, and your body prepares for that fight or flight, right? And so you respond to that stress at a heightened level, but then you go back down to what we call homeostasis, your normal level where you are not stressed, right? If you experience more stress, you release more hormones, more stress mediators to respond to that level of stress. And then you go back down to your normal level once the stressor goes away. So what happens when you are chronically exposed to stress and your stressor never goes away? Imagine the bear just standing there and never going away, and you are chronically in a fear or flight mode. All right. So what happens is your stress mediators, your cortisol and your adrenaline, never go back down to normal baseline, which is your homeostasis. You are chronically in a stressed state. And that's where you're at. You go up and down at that higher level. And so what happens is this chronically elevated level of stress hormones has an impact on your brain, right? So this is the neuroscience of burnout. So when you're in chronically fear or flight mode, this activates your amygdala. This is your emotional center, your fear and aggression. You're more reactive. You're driven more by emotion, right? Your anxiety spikes. Even the smallest problems can feel like they're very huge. This chronic level of stress also weakens your medial prefrontal cortex. This is the area of the brain that is responsible for executive functions such as planning, focus, and decision making. You struggle to think clearly and regulate your emotions, and you struggle to make decisions. You lose motivation and joy even for the things that you love. This chronic stress also weakens your hippocampus. This is the area of the brain that is responsible for your memory and learning. This is why you feel like you have brain fog, you have impaired recall. You also have difficulty solving problems. And this also decreases your productivity. And when chronic stress goes on for a long time unchecked, it can change your brain structure. Long-term occupational stress is associated with reducing certain areas of your brain size, as well as the ability of the different parts of your brain to control each other, right? The functional connectivity where the higher order thinking can regulate your emotions. And so what happens is your amygdala, the emotional center of your brain, gets bigger, while your medial prefrontal cortex, which is the executive function that helps you plan and think, actually reduces in size, as well as the hippocampus, which is your memory and learning center. And in addition to that, their ability to connect and control each other goes down as well. And now you're driven by emotion. And so what happens is when you have chronically elevated levels of stress hormones, in addition to the impact that it has on your brain, where you're driven by emotion and your executive functions are less, there are consequences. And these consequences can show up in several ways, whether it's physical, psychological, or occupational. And so the physical consequences of burnout are actual medical conditions. Burnout can lead to type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, coronary artery disease, being hospitalized for cardiovascular disease, and so forth. And what I want you to pay attention to is the bottom one, mortality before the age of 45. This is death before the age of 45 because you have all these other risk factors, right? So we cannot afford to ignore the fact that burnout is real. It has real life consequences. Psychological consequences of burnout, insomnia, depressive symptoms, being on treatment for depression, and being hospitalized for mental disorders. We cannot ignore burnout, right? And occupational consequences, being dissatisfied with your job because you have all these other symptoms. Absenteeism, meaning you take time off for sick leave, and presenteeism, where you're showing up even though you shouldn't because you're not feeling well, as well as being on disability. So yes, burnout is real. Burnout is real and the consequences are dire. It is not a myth. It is not a weakness, and it is not a mindset issue. Burnout is a biological response to unsustainable stress. And once you understand the science behind burnout, you can recover fully without sacrificing your ambition, your career, or your well-being. But first, we have to understand how we normally treat burnout and why it continues to return. So how do we treat burnout? We treat the symptoms. And so how do we treat those symptoms? We recommend taking time off, go on vacation, take a little bit of break from work, and then you come back to the same situation. We recommend that you get a massage, do yoga. What happens with these measures? They are only temporary, right? You do yoga, you get a massage, you go on 2 weeks vacation, you come back to the same situations that have caused you to burn out in the first place, and then your hormone levels go up, right? You're chronically stressed again, and you go through the same vicious cycle, same impacts on your brain, same consequences, and then you burn out again, you take another trip, and you do a little bit of recovery, right? And so it's burnout, recovery, burnout, recovery, burnout, recovery. This is the vicious cycle, okay? Well, how we should treat burnout is we should treat all three, not just the symptoms, but the root causes as well. What is causing you to be in chronic stress mode at all times? And how do we rewire our brain so that we're not prone to burnout over and over and over? So burnout recovery requires 3 steps. And step number 1 is symptom relief. You can't be in burnout mode and strategize. You have to relieve the symptoms and get out of burnout mode. Once you are out of burnout, then you can identify the root cause. What is causing you to be chronically stressed? And how do you go back down to homeostasis where you're not chronically being stressed? It's okay to have short spurts of stress, but you need to be able to go back down to your regular homeostasis, your normal balance of not being stressed out. So once you have symptom relief and you're not chronically stressed, then you can identify what the root cause is, right? And step number 3 is, how do you prevent recurrence? The current approaches that we have are not working because they don't prevent recurrence. When you take a 2-week vacation, guess what happens? You come back to the same situation, the same workload, the same responsibilities at home, right? And so your burnout recurs over and over and over. With step 3, when we prevent recurrence, we re-engage our executive functions, right? The medial prefrontal cortex. We re-engage it and we plan better. We reactivate your hippocampus and say, how do we learn a new way of navigating our lives and careers so that we're not in constant burnout mode, right? Unless you take this approach, you're going to be in constant burnout recovery, vicious cycle. This is what our burnout recovery roadmap does. It is rooted in neuroscience, stress physiology, and the lived experiences of high achieving women who are managing a lot more than just workplace related stress. And through the 5-step burnout recovery process, you relieve symptoms, get to the root cause, and prevent burnout for good. So yes, burnout is real and it has dire consequences if you continue to ignore it. And with the Burnout Recovery Code, you can achieve career success and make time for life without being in constant burnout. This is the exact strategy we use in our community to help you overcome burnout and prevent it from recurring for good. If you'd like to learn more about how to implement the Burnout Recovery Roadmap, you can join us at the link in the description. And so to wrap up with the answer, yes, burnout is very real and ignoring it has dire consequences. And with the Burnout Recovery Roadmap, you can achieve career success and make time for life without being in constant burnout. If you found this video helpful and you'd like more science-backed strategies to recover from burnout, make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on. And watch the next video that dives deeper into your brain on burnout.